We're back, and we're here with David Louis Edelman, whose latest novel, MultiReal, is in bookstores now. David, welcome to Fast Forward, and thank you for stopping by.
Thanks.
Let's talk about how someone goes about creating a trilogy. Now, Infoquake came out 2 years ago.
2006, somewhere. Yeah.
And 2008, we get MultiReal.
Correct.
But there was a significant amount of time before we got Infoquake,
Right.
where you were building a world.
Correct. I believe the first chapters of the first draft of Infoquake that I wrote were sometime in 1997 or 1998. And somewhere around November of 2000, I started writing in earnest. I had 30, 40 pages of noodling around. Probably finished it in 2004, something like that. And it took a little while to get into print. So,
And you're doing this while you're still working full-time at your profession.
actually, in 2000, I quit full-time work because I decided that I didn't want to work full-time anymore. I wanted to write novels. So
That's a incredibly brave and terrifying leap to make.
it's terrifying. I'm not sure how brave it is, but yeah, it was pretty scary. But I guess you reach a point in your life where you have to go for it or not. So,
Let's talk about this world you've created. Now,
Okay.
we're far in the future.
yes.
We have gone essentially beyond the time of the current governments and the current societal structures.
Correct.
Mankind had moved technologically to a point where essentially autonomous artificial intelligences were effectively running the bulk of the mechanisms that kept the world going and afloat and allowed mankind
Right.
to survive and thrive culturally and economically. And then that system crashed tragically and wiped out
Yes.
a large portion of the world. And we started from scratch, which is where you start building your history.
Yes. It's a nice little reset there, so we can sort of fudge a lot of the history in the middle, and I don't have to give a very specific timeline, and it's a nice little trick, I think.
And you posit a world where basically after an interregnum of religious intolerance and an absolute
Sort of dark
ban
ages.
on the embrace of technology and the use of technology because it had turned out so badly, a new and even more vibrant form of technology comes out
Yes.
of that interregnum that provides a whole new set of structures and abilities for mankind. Can you talk about that and why you decided to use that kind of structure for your story?
Well, the new dawn that you're talking about, they call it the reawakening in the story. And it's basically there's this character named Sheldon Serena who 400 or so years before the time of the novel comes out with this invention called biologics, bio/logics, which is the programming of the human body. You have nanobots floating all throughout your body. You have programming where you can program them so you can change your eye color, you can make yourself sweat, stop sweat, you can control your digestive system, all those kinds of things. And this quickly becomes the dominant technology in the world. He becomes a mega billionaire, trillionaire, whatever you want to call it, and does this big paradigm shift where the world once again gets on this technological track out of the dark ages into this reawakening of scientific thought.
And there are several cycles of scientific advancement before we get to the point where we begin our
Right.
story.
Right.
And at that point, biologics is the hotbed of innovation. Not so much the mechanics of it, but software
Yes.
is is where everything new is happening in the society.
Yes. There's a very thriving cutthroat industry to build software for all these nanobots that are floating in your body. I explained in one of the appendices in the first book that pretty much the hardware for the little nanobots became a monopoly, and then the sort of data compendium that sort of runs the knowledge, the medical knowledge of the human body, also became something of a quasi-governmental entity. So the only thing left in sort of the private enterprise is this software industry, which becomes tremendously cutthroat, kind of like the the .com scenario turned up to 11. That's what I like to say.
And what we have is we have a lead character called Natch,
Mm-hmm.
who is, I would say, the ultimate survivalist, a gifted
Yes.
programmer, an orphan out of tragic circumstances, who then nonetheless has connections to some absolutely brilliant and well-financed people, both through friends and through the relationship his mother had with
Mm-hmm.
another gentleman. And he basically moves the story forward as he basically establishes himself in the biologics business
Mm-hmm.
and moves up the ladder very rapidly,
Yes.
using every tool that is available in terms of approaches, both in terms of software innovation and business tactics, both traditional and, shall we say, shady,
Yeah.
to move up the ladder.
Yeah, he's definitely an ethically compromised or challenged individual, as we can say.
Ethically challenged, I would
Yeah.
say that, and he's not the only character we focus on. There
Right.
are several of his apprentices, let's talk about the structure, how this structure works. You have the head of a corporation who is
Right.
formed, and then the people working for him have a rather unique working relationship within the company structure.
Yeah, it's called a fief corp. Is the structure that they work in, where there's basically a master and apprentices. And I explained in the appendix of the first book how the apprentices work for the term varies. I think it's generally like 2 years for the master, and then their shares mature. But during that time, they essentially get nothing but room and board. So it's a quasi-feudal situation they've got set up there.
Which reflects an awful lot of what happened with the dot-com boom. Everybody
Yeah.
basically worked for what was a relative pittance in terms of actual salary, and it was all stock options and everything else that they
Yeah.
could cash out at the back end if the company was a success. That was the incentive to work the insane hours that they had to work.
Correct. And that's, a little bit of the reflection of that. The other thing that you notice that's going on, though, is that Natch and his sort of colleagues in this biologics industry are kind of all on sort of this lower tier of the world structure. And you notice sort of floating in the background, you never really see them, are these lunar tycoons who are the multi-gazillionaires who really pulling the strings behind the scenes. And they're really removed from things. And so you really have, I wouldn't say a lower class, but it's sort of this sort of working class where most of the characters that we see are in. And then there's a class that's just way far removed from that.
And we only catch glimpses of them in the first two novels, actually. I mean,
Correct,
just the
correct.
very occasional glimpses. But what I found fascinating was the structure you placed in the society. This is a very fragmented society, and
Yeah.
and just as most of the technology is now focused on biologics, on engineering and programming for the human body to make it more efficient, to extend life, to extend the productive functionality of life, to improve the function of the brain, the ability to receive and process information. But you also have a whole new set of structures that have replaced religion and the general study of ethics in the creeds
Yes.
that also are one of the main drivers of an awful lot of the storyline that you tell.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I really wanted to have a post-religious world. There's essentially religion has kind of, it hasn't completely disappeared. It's gone underground to this group that now called the Pharisees, which are, you'll see a little bit more about them in book 3, but they're essentially all of the remaining adherents of the old religions kind of went and retreated into the Middle East and kind of walled themselves off from the rest of the world.
And they went offline. They did. They are not a
Yes.
participant in this
Correct.
in this new structure with the new technologies that allows people to communicate with each other
Correct.
and to self-regulate their bodies through various programs that they buy.
Yeah, they're off the line. They've taken themselves out of the equation, but there's sort of a moral vacuum once you have the religion gone, and I really strongly believe, I'm an atheist myself, and I've always believed that morality is not really, doesn't really come from religion. It's sort of a separate entity into itself, and I really strongly believe that absent the mythology and the sort of the the history that we have in the current religions, the driving forces of the morality that we have in our religious structures would continue to exist. So you have these creeds that are devoted to ideas like for instance, a creed objective is one of the ones that's mentioned frequently in the book. And they're
focusing on the truth.
Focusing on truth and the power of truth. And Creed Serena is another one of the prime movers in the story, which is they're sort of devoted to this, they're kind of this mystical, almost like a cult devoted to the wonders of science. And there are a number of others that are sort of mentioned throughout the novels.
And one that actually becomes very important to the storyline is the creed that preaches selfishness.
Yes, Creed Thessal, yes. And they are kind of almost like your parody, sort of the Ayn Rand, every man for himself kind of thing. And they're very much devoted to selfishness, and it becomes a prime philosophical underpinning of what I guess you would call him the antagonist one of the prime antagonists of the second book, is doing. It becomes this power of selfishness and this idea of selfishness as a prime mover of society and technology.
And the Jump 225 trilogy is essentially telling the story of a paradigm shift in society.
Yes.
A new technology comes along that is going to completely alter the way people view themselves in the world. Has a potential to do so.
Yes.
And you have Natch handed the opportunity to actually be the caretaker for this technology and the disseminator, the improver, the making the conceptual elements of it practical and usable, and caught between at least 2, if not 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8, 9 competing ideologies with different views of how it should be used, whether it should be used, whether it's even good for it to exist. You have people wanting to maintain the status quo. You have people who want to radically use it as a tool to completely blow apart the extant society and remake yet again the society of humankind. And they're kind of caught in the middle. They're kind of in the middle of this whirlpool of competing interests and extremely vulnerable most of the time.
Right, right. And it's one of several paradigm shifts. We talked about the autonomous revolt several hundred years where we had this autonomous mind, AI-run culture that sort of crashed and ran to the ground. And now what came in its place was the scientific society. And now basically they've reached the pinnacle of where that's going. They've reached kind of the end of that. And you're now kind of at the point where, okay, well, what's next? I mean, and we're sort of, and we find ourselves, I think, in our current society at that point where we have all these new technologies pushing and pulling us in different directions, and people are talking about the end of the nation state, and and fragmentation and nichification and uploading and all of this kind of stuff. The singularity's coming in the next 20, 30 years, according to some of these, some of these wackier theories.
But you talk about that, and one of your characters talks about what the universe wants is constant movement.
Yes.
And what mankind seems to move toward and has to be moved away from is stasis, is the refining of a given to the point of where basically you're just moving in a circle. All you're doing is refining, improving the horse cart rather than moving on to the combustion engine, that
Sure.
type of a thing. And that's what's happening here is kind of the inevitable universal movement towards another level, as it were.
It's entire a dissertation, in a sense, about scientific progress and where this is heading. I mean, we're sort of pulled in this direction, and you have a lot of characters talking about wants. You have one character giving a sermon about how when you have a version 1.0 of a software, it wants to have an improved version. I mean, you're never going to get to the point where you're going to say, okay, well, here's Microsoft Windows, it's done. Okay, there it is. You're finished. Well, Windows especially, you're not at that point. But Linux, Mac, any operating system, you're never going to get to the point where you're going to say, well, we finished it, we did it, we built the operating system. What's next? There's always room for improvements, and then the question becomes, well, where's that heading? How far are you going to follow that?
And what does it cost to the rest
Right.
to the world?
And
And how do you find the balance that you also are seeking?
right, and that's the main question, I think, of the trilogy. That's sort of the underlying question of the entire world, and not only that, but of the individual characters themselves. You know, what is happening in the world is kind of a macrocosm of what's going on with the characters themselves as well. You know, you have Jara, who's trying to find a balance between, you know, having a personal life and having a work life.
Good luck
so
with
many
that
of,
one.
Yeah, so many of us do in our lives. You know, you have Natch, who's also trying to find that balance, but in a totally separate way. So you know, balance is really the key question, I think, of these novels.
Now, you know, you start this. These are your first 2 books, and congratulations. I mean, a remarkable accomplishment. You know, to a certain extent, sheer force of will as well as talent. But
Or luck.
well, no, you know, people make their own luck. Is my firm belief. People make their own luck, or people who are given an opportunity have the courage to seize it. But the second book, you had talked in some of your blogs. You have a very active website and a very active blog site. Not so much active since I believe it was 30 days ago, the birth of your...
The birth of my twins. And so...
Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. So basically the activity in the blog has dropped to, I'd say nothing at this point. So,
But the second novel was the hardest, because the bridge is always the hardest.
yes, the second novel was a real bear to write. I think, you know, I wrote all about this, as you said, on my blog. You just have so many challenges. Not so much if you have one set of challenges if you're just talking about a sequel to a standalone novel. You have another set of challenges if you're writing, you know, the Two Towers, which is essentially what MultiReal is.
Yes.
It's the middle book of a trilogy which is not standalone. So you have no beginning and you have no end. You have no introduction of the characters. You know, they're pre-existing characters, and yet you have to remind the reader of who these characters are. You have a story that's continuing, and you can't sit there and spend 150 pages recapping the prison story, but you have to say something, because, you know, it's not, you can't rely on the fact that the readers are going to put down book 1 and pick up book 2 immediately.
Exactly. Well, I have to tell you, I've put down book 1. I picked up book 2. I put down book 2. When do I get book 3?
Let's see. I am hoping that the current plan is that book 3 will come out somewhere in the February-ish of 2010 range. So a year and a half after MultiReal, as opposed to 2 years, which is Infoquake came out in 2006, MultiReal came out in 2008, and now I'm hoping
Early
to shrinking
2010.
it. Yeah, I'm hoping.
And the name of
so.
that one will be?
Will be Geosynchron. Is the name of the third
Geosynchron.
book.
So 2010, Geosynchron, the conclusion
Correct.
of the Jump 225 trilogy.
Yes.
Well, David, we're out of time.
Wow.
We're out of time.
Really?
We're out of time. Thank you
Let's
so
just
much.
get going.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for stopping by. Well, I encourage you to finish this conversation on your blog.
I will do that if I can remember how to log on to it after all this.
Thank you
sleep
for coming to see
deprivation.
us, and we look forward in 2010 to your next novel.
Great.
Well, that's it for this edition of Fast Forward. We hope you found something of interest, and we hope you'll come see us again. Until then, this is Tom Schad saying, take care.